The name of this session is called Next Steps. So I think it is imperative that as we go forward, I would hope that we can frame our conversations on building on the several themes we've heard over the last couple of days, both from a legal standpoint, sandboxing, from a business innovation standpoint, some of the examples we've had from Jamaican, Barbados, and other places, as well as understanding what we're trying to do in terms of who we're trying to reach in the marketplace. In that context, I'm going to encourage, I'm not going to ask many questions. I'm hoping that the conversation organically develops between the panelists. I only request that we, in going forward, we think in determining the next steps, we look at properly and consistently identifying the challenge or the problem we're trying to solve. Accurate problem identification leads to successful solution identification and will assist us, I'm sure, in filtering through the clutter of information that we've been, that has been shared, all very relevant, so that we can identify a solution that benefits not just each of our Caribbean islands, but the region as a whole. To that end, Honourable Minister, do you have any opening statements? Yeah.
Yeah. You know, when Kwesi result these introductions, it makes me realize that I'm an old man in the room. I see my friend over there is also light vintage, and my friend over here light vintage. But so in a sense, we ought not even to be here in this panel. But be that as it may, let me give you a little take on how, as a policymaker and regulator, somebody who's operated in a number of different sectors of the economy, quite a few different sectors of the economy, how I take going forward. My first point is that the most pressing problem we have now in our financial services in the region is the essential one of correspondent banking. If one agrees with that, then it seems that more effort ought to be made to deal with that particular problem. And maybe we need to have the work that's being done on the different technologies coordinated with the people, more the people in the financial systems, more the people in the KYC and AML area, and the legal people. I have not heard anything particularly over the last 2 days which suggests to me that we're not going to have much the same problem with correspondent banking unless the blockchain thing can actually work, and it seems that's always off, maybe. That all the other measures that we've talked about are still going to have that issue of not dealing with the risks that are perceived by the developed world around our clearing systems. That to me seems to be the major issue that we have to deal with in the financial community, and by extension in the digital financial services area. Why does it move from traditional financial services area into the digital financial services area? It moves there because the digital financial services can either worsen the problem or worsen the perception of the problem. Or it could, if we use it right, and if we do our marketing well, may help us to reduce the seriousness of that perception. But there's work to be done there. Serious work on this matter. This is existential. I think this work has to happen. And because it's existential, then I think we need to get, as a region, get more of our technical people, both in the ICT field and in the finance field, to be working full time on this problem. It's not something that we can just decide to do, in my view. We can just do as a side job or as a part-time assignment by some people. I think it needs to have the resources placed on it. Pull our best resources from around all the fields from around the region and put them to work, shut them up in a room until they find the stuff that helps us to solve this particular problem. The second issue that I would have as a policymaker is this matter of earning foreign exchange. I have become very suspicious of a lot of the new technological developments and their usefulness for the Caribbean people. I say that blandly, like that, to shock a few people. But really, we have to be very careful about how the technology encourages us and facilitates us in using scarce foreign exchange. We want to have a good quality of life. We want to enjoy the things that the technology enables us to access. But that instant gratification has to be balanced by our economy in using foreign exchange, or if we do not wish to exercise the economy using foreign exchange by our tenacity, by our efforts to earn more foreign exchange. So I have a difficulty with the digital financial services discussion, which stops at digital payments, digital financial services, and does not go over the water to e-commerce for all of our business types. And so I wonder, as I wondered aloud this morning to Mr. McNaughton, whether people like Grace Kennedy could not become master merchant account holders in order to facilitate some of the smaller people who have difficulty in getting merchant accounts to do e-commerce. I don't know. It's a wild idea, and I've been known to be a little bit mad sometimes. But I throw out the matter. But here's a problem that we've been struggling with for years. We've not got a solution. In the same way that we are now interposing retail agents in between commercial banks and retail customers, can we not interpose a large conglomerate, which is not a bank, in between the banking system and the small and medium small micro enterprises, in order to enable them to do more e-commerce and to use and to sell therefore more of our Caribbean goods and services to other Caribbean customers, to our diaspora customers, to that market from abroad that comes to the Caribbean each and every year, probably in the vicinity, 10 million people that come visit us each year in the Caribbean, and therefore become a natural market, at least interesting market for some of our goods and services. I raise the issue. I think we need to do a little bit of thinking about that and a little bit of work about that. My third area, which I think we need to do some more work on, and it's implied in a lot of discussion we've heard, is this matter of improving the productivity of our people. Now, my interest in the digital financial services is largely driven by what it helps us to do in terms of productivity. People doing things faster, when it's more convenient, avoiding time wasted at work, allowing governments and companies and so on to do business faster and better. Now, all of our economies are struggling with the issue of productivity. We have not had the productivity growth in the region, I'm told, that we need to have. And for me, the same platform that helps us do digital financial services, we need to do that some more. And therefore, governments, I think, need to put some task forces to work to come up with ways in which we can improve government to citizen services, improve citizen to government conversations. And we don't have to all reinvent the wheel. There are some of our governments that have begun to do quite substantial work and implement some substantial systems, some significant systems in these areas. What we need to do is borrow from each other. We are quite happy to borrow or copy from abroad. We should be quite prepared to borrow from each other and to make the adaptation that's required so that we can get the productivity within the government sector, within the business sectors, from the same platform, the same set of services that drive the digital financial services. That work needs to be done quickly. And allied to that is a matter that we must see the digital financial services reducing the costs of doing business. If we do not have, as a part of the policy initiative, work to be done to see what the actual costs of production are, to see how those costs of production have come down, and to ensure that those savings are passed on and distributed through the economy, what we are going to do is to create economic rent for a number of people. Some people, those people who have the technology, will therefore make higher than usual profits, while the rest of us will pay the same fees as we've been paying. Now, that seems to go against the grain of the technology, but we have to be very careful that we do that work and make sure that everybody is aware of how we expect those costs to change, not only for individual private and retail consumers, but for the businesses and government as a whole. I mean, one of the things that scares governments about using, for example, credit card transactions, credit cards to collect taxes and so on, is a 2 or 3% charge on credit cards. If you're collecting $2 billion worth or $3 billion worth of revenue per year, that's a substantial turnoff. I'm going to stop there. A few wild thoughts. I think that gives some people some little fodder to attack me a little bit. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Boyce. I think those were very provocative ideas. Shiva, do you have any early thoughts on, first, either what the Honourable Minister has put on the table as some key issues that must be addressed going forward, or do you identify some things yourself that, based on the conversations earlier over the last couple of days, you think needs to be highlighted?
Thanks, Kwesi. Yeah, really lofty goals. And I hope that, the past 2 days of conversation has stimulated the right minds to start tackling these problems, as you've heard. I'll get into some of these afterwards. I just want to say a couple words of thanks to the ECLAC and the ITU facilitating this forum. I think the genesis of this program that we are participating in right now came from a study we did at ECLAC on digital currency. And out of that, we saw some serious problems with respect to electronic payment systems. And that spurred on the further Cleveland to let's have an intervention on this, get the right people in the room, get the right thinkers in the room, as we saw from the Jamaican example, get the right people and the right to have the right conversations about tackling these problems. And I think that's what we need. We need the academics, the entrepreneurs, policymakers. We need to come together to tackle these problems. And this is the second annual conference. Dare I say annual, which implies a third. We'll see. With respect to I want to thank the various presenters as well, all the presenters who participated. If for those of you who participated in the session last year and the session this year, you would note that the themes have kind of moved. There's a logical flow within the teams. Last year we looked at the Haitian mobile money scenario. This year we looked at the Jamaican mobile money scenario. We developed further the digital currency conversation, the blockchain. We've looked at some of these purported technological solutions to truly evaluate whether they are real or not, whether they truly offer solutions. So it's all part of the process of getting the right minds, stimulating the right minds, bringing, you may be from an island, you never heard about what was taking place in Jamaica with respect to mobile money. Now you know. So what can we take from that? You may have never heard about what Nicola is doing with respect to the Bank of England and the FCA regulatory sandbox, and now you know. So it's about stimulating minds, getting ideas, not cut and pasting, but just stimulating that thought process to see what we can try here. All right, with respect to the correspondent banking problem, this was something that we thought we needed to put on the agenda. It is not truly an IT issue, as Minister indicated. It's a financial issue, but it does fall under the remit of digital financial services, in that digital financial services could be seen as worsening the problem, could be seen as the perception of the problem, or sometimes that technology could be reduce the perception of that problem. Indeed, we have seen last year we uncovered, or as part of the ECLAC research, we uncovered an instance where a potential entrepreneur who wanted to provide a remittance solution in a Caribbean island, he could not get commercial banking facilities, so he had to stop that remittance app that he was doing. And there's this perception that when you're dealing with money, when you're dealing with mobile apps, you're dealing with mobile money, you're dealing with things like digital currency, commercial banks are very risk averse. And Nicola indicated some of that as well with respect to digital currency companies not getting commercial banking facility. So that's all part of this problem of de-risking, when commercial banks don't want to be perceived as taking on too much risk or having clients that are engaged in activities that could be perceived as risky. So the blockchain has been touted about. We've heard a lot about blockchain. Maybe I'm at fault for bringing up some conversations around blockchain, but there's definite benefit to blockchain, but we need to look at it and carefully evaluate what is being proposed. As Bobby would have pointed out, blockchain does offer promise, but as to if it will offer us a solution, we need to evaluate that further. And what I have been advocating for, and I don't want to advocate it to the extent of paralysis analysis or analysis paralysis, but we need to do more research in these areas. You said that we need people working full time on these things. I have been approaching people on these issues, some of these issues, since 2013, and the doors have been, just that having a conversation with people, the right people, is difficult. So in addition to having people look at these problems, we need to be a little more receptive to some of the ideas that are out there and hearing out some of these voices that we have. That we had an example from the IoT workshop where a young man, basically put out the same problem, that doors being shut before they're being open. So we need to be a little more receptive to some of the thoughts that are out there. So yeah, definitely for point number one, correspondent banking, I say we do some further research into the promise of blockchain, and let's get to the point where we can hopefully see a real life solution, a real life proposed solution, fully costed out, with respect to and taking into consideration risk, compliance, all those things that will accompany any potential replacement for what we're asking for right now. With respect to earning foreign exchange, I think the first session, we kicked it off right on that point where Minister Melford indicated that the diaspora community it's not just those who have left, it's 3 times the population of the Caribbean community, 60 million people. And what we're trying to do, or what has been taking place, is that our entrepreneurs have been struggling because they can't receive payment. And basically what we are doing with our entrepreneurs is that we are denying them access to global marketplaces. That's what we are doing because they can't receive the payment solutions. So with respect to earning foreign exchange, I think, and Mr. Dr. McNaughton and the other McNaughton from GK, they talked about merchant payment solutions. So e-commerce and merchant payment solutions are there and are a part of the landscape of digital financial services, whereby we allow for payments or people to receive payments, and then we could take it to the extent where Minister Nicholas wanted to go, payments for the selling of digital cultural goods. So this is all part of the conversation that we need to undertake. The ITU, I don't know if he presented it this year, VJ, that is, merchant payments is a big part of that, that whole ecosystem of digital financial services. So again, I would say, I like the point, get people to work full-time on these problems. I will advocate for more research into this area because, 20 plus years, certain islands have been struggling with electronic payments. I've never seen Nigel get so passionate about a non-kit telecom issue. He was putting up his hand before the man even done talk. And we know, let's think out of the box on this thing. We've been trying the same thing, probably with the same structures for quite a while. Let's try something new. Probably we need to have fresh eyes, take a look at these problems. Probably we need to look at where we get our information from, rely on new sources of information. I don't know. But we need to think out of the box with respect to solving this and developing merchant payment solutions that can benefit our entrepreneurs. With respect to improving productivity, yeah, I'm all for that. And I see the efficiencies that digital financial services can provide. We had a good example yesterday of the plumber and how he can receive payment on the fly from the guy without the guy moving from his desk. So, these are some of the things we need to look at, but we need an enabling regulatory environment to provide for these things. Because as it is right now, electronic money and payment systems, payment instruments are strictly defined as payment card. I can't have like a mobile money solution, an e-token mobile money solution in Trinidad and Tobago. I don't know how it is for other Caribbean countries. But I like the work that Jamaica did. I like the process that they went through more than anything else, the process of bringing the right people together over a period of time, having that collaboration and conversation, which is something I think you mentioned at the start. We need that collaboration, we need that conversation to be had between the right stakeholders to move forward with these things and develop a policy and regulatory environment that would allow for these services to come, and then we'll see the increase in productivity.
Thanks, Shiva. I think you threw in a couple new ideas. You started to talk about changing of processes and frameworks, which built on an earlier comment. I think it was when the bankers were here, and they were talking about the structure of the financial sector in the Caribbean, and maybe what we're anticipating or what we're looking forward to. Some things which may not fit well into the existing financial structure. So hopefully I'm trying to tease some ideas out there and some questions. But now I'm going to let Vashti have her opening remarks.
Hi, good afternoon. A lot of things that I'm going to say, I'm sure you've heard ad nauseum during the course of the past few days. So I'm going to be very brief. The matter of fact is that sociologically, people tend to distrust what they don't know or fully comprehend and understand. No better place or no better example can we draw than within the Caribbean itself. Even Shiva's example of an innovator or entrepreneur who wanted to offer digital financial services, but no bank wanted to give him an account. It is not that they don't see the feasibility of the business product. It is that they are unfamiliar completely with the terms of what he wants to do, how he wants to do it, and they're very unfamiliar whether this is legal or not. So they tend to take a hands-off approach. And you will find within the Caribbean and internationally, innovation and technology usually supersedes legislation, policy, and regulation. Now, don't get me wrong, we do have smart people in the government and ministers who are innovators or entrepreneurs, and also legal people who don't have foresight. But you find that there seems to be a degree of caution in how to approach new digital financial services and products because of the fact that they need to understand a few things. How does that integrate? Okay, we see how it works on an international level. How does that integrate with all countries on a local level? Is there a market for it? How will that work within our current financial ecosystem? You are aware our Exchequer and Audit Act is from 1952. And many of our banking systems, legal and regulatory systems, are fairly dated. Granted, certain jurisdictions like Bahamas, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados have updated their legislation, and they have done it in a very technology neutral way to recognize electronic currencies. However, it doesn't go into strict definitions of identification of digital currencies, cryptocurrencies, what types of currencies are recognized and accepted. That is something that is now under the purview of the central banks of each jurisdiction as the financial regulator. And I'm sure we've all heard the presentation by Ms. Devines. You find that within the Caribbean, as a response to the need to undertake a multi-stakeholder approach to how we go about approaching new payment systems and new forms of currency exchange, we have various payment systems councils within the Caribbean. Jamaica is a very good example. They've legislated for it. Within Trinidad and Tobago, we too have a payment systems council. And yes, the sandboxing approach may have worked very successfully in the UK, but it is our way of bringing to the table all the major players from the private and public sector in order for all of us to gain an understanding of the priorities and articulate an approach. Now, I've heard what was said by my colleague from a policy approach as also Shiva from a technical approach. But from where I sit from a legal approach, there's a fine balancing exercise that needs to be undertaken. And that balancing exercise is really, when you draft a law, the number one question is, what is the mischief that you are seeking to address? And every nation in the Caribbean needs to now identify what are its socioeconomic needs. What do we want to address? What do we want to promote? What is the good that we want to bring and the value derived to our own country? That's one element. So you want to try to develop legislation, policies, and the regulatory infrastructure to give a good foundation. And it does not need to be a heavy-handed approach, but want to foster innovation. You don't want to stifle it. But by the same token, we're all aware that for as long as we've invented money, we've invented ways to steal it, hide it, and do really bad things with it. Money, as any other force, can be used for good or evil. And particularly within the Caribbean sphere, we've had a bad name over the years associated with AML compliance. We've all been under the FATCA debate, and certain legislation within certain jurisdictions has been passed to foster AML compliance, FATCA and CFATF obligations. We also have to deal with the fact that we have new considerations involving terrorist financing, know your customer requirements that are now imposed within each state. Now, how does that work hand in hand with cryptocurrencies where anonymity seems to be a premium? So there is a balancing exercise that needs to be undertaken when looking at it from the policy, legal, and regulatory position. And if you were to look at it from even a Caribbean level, we all know that it is very hard for one country to come up with an articulated position. Sometimes it's even harder, as you may be aware, for the entire Caribbean to come up with a harmonized approach with regard to how to deal with digital currencies within a common space that is the Caribbean. But the discourse needs to be had. Because if certain regional blocs like the OECS can successfully operate with one central banking system and come up with common policies, it is clearly not beyond us. So, that being said, and I'm sure there are many other matters which will come up and we can seek to address during the course of our discussion, but that's really the baseline for the legislative approach.
Thank you, Vashti. Very wide-ranging discourse, bringing up and reiterating what was said earlier in the session regarding the question of compliance, and I guess it guides back to what the minister said about correspondent banking. All right, but so while correspondent banking and our interaction with our international partners has so far been addressed in this conversation, what I haven't heard, but has been said over and over over the course of the past couple of days, is the question of a mechanism. So that's from the top end, how we deal with correspondent banking and how our banks interact with the external financial institutions. I've also heard many references to the targeting, where we're targeting the unbanked or the underbanked, which would be those at the bottom of the system, yes? I myself, mea culpa, this is a disclosure. I myself, in looking at the situation, I'm not overly impressed with any channel or any mechanism which is dependent on the consumer using a mechanism which uses foreign exchange to access a digital financial service. So I always give this example about e-payment. We say e-payments, and people say, well, I can pay with my credit card. But a credit card is fundamentally something which is mediated, especially online, by international financial services. And therefore it's a drawdown and becomes a burden on the foreign exchange state of the balance of foreign exchange. So I was wondering, what is your take on the other side? Minister first, maybe Shiva next, but shorter people, please, because you want the crowd the audience to get an opportunity. What's your take on the other side about how do we onboard customers? What do you think are the requirements of a digital financial service solution so that we can onboard customers without and overcome that hurdle of requiring a credit card or requiring access to Forex to access the system in the first place? Minister, any thoughts?
About 30 or 35 years ago, we used to have limits on how much foreign exchange you could have on a credit card. And if you wanted to do more than that, you had to go into the central bank and get permissions and get them expand your limit. Now, the modern theory of liberalization in the financial services and this notion that the market knows best, not to say a notion, I'm not sure Wall Street knows better than anybody else what it's doing, has led us to the stage now where, for the most part, credit limits, US dollar or foreign currency limits on credit cards tend not to exist anymore, or is equal to the total limit of the card. And it may be that we have to stop once more and consider whether or not the liberalization of the financial services as defined by the rest of the world is really helpful to us in some ways. Now, the issue we have in the Caribbean, because we have different currencies, all of which are defined as foreign currency to each other. That is really where I think you get an issue, because then you limit the trade between Caribbean islands, and that's really not what we want. It's really not what we venture into the integration movement for. But that's a little hitch. Maybe there's a way you can deal with that, given the power of the systems that we have, the computer systems. It shouldn't take them very long to figure out if you've hit your TT dollar limit or whatever it is that you have, or if your currency, your transaction is not in a non-carry, is not in a CARICOM country currency. So that's part of what we may have to think about. So that may push us into a part of regulation, which we have to begin to reconsider from and draw upon lessons that we learned previously in this region.
Shiva, I know this is one of your pet babies. Take the floor.
All right. No, so all right. So I think Minister handled the foreign exchange part of the question, but you asked a couple other things about the unbanked and onboarding. With respect to the foreign exchange part, I think this is where people like BIT would propose some tokenized based system that you could buy into using your own currency and then using that tokenized based system to transfer value. Again, we need to see full working solution. No, you're not using foreign currency. You're using you're buying that token and you're using that token within the region to settle. Yeah. So, and again, I'm not advocating BIT or any service. What I'm saying is that we need to be looking for solutions like this that could reduce that dependency for foreign exchange to settle or clear and so on. So that's all I'll say on the foreign exchange one. With respect to the onboarding and the underbanked, I like what Dr. McNaughton and they showed us with respect to tiered levels that you could have access to, tiered AML and KYC requirements based on limits of transactions. So if your limit on your transaction is X, then you only have to provide this amount of identification to become a customer of a service. The higher your limit, the more little pieces of identification or proofs of ID that you have to provide, and that is commonplace within some of these more mobile money systems or digital currency systems. But then again, payment card-based systems, you still have to go to the bank and provide them with 2 forms of ID, utility bill, blah 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 blah. So that is what prevails right now. So until we get to a more advanced state, we're not going to have tiered onboarding per se. We're just going to have exactly what we have right now. The underbanked and the unbanked, I believe it was 20% stated in Trinidad and Tobago. Was it 30% in Jamaica? 35% in Jamaica. So this is a problem. These are people who are excluded from traditional financial services or limited in what they can provide, what they can use. Like Dr. McNaughton said, they could deposit, but can they truly transact? Can they truly participate in an electronic economy? And does that now stymie growth of the economy? Because they are excluded from the system. So the velocity is not the same as if they were included. So this is the whole purpose of this conference. Digital financial services, this conference, this workshop is not about digital currencies, not about mobile money. Terence Clark made a statement that DFS is wide-ranging. It covers areas such as digital credit, microfinance, microinsurance. There are a wide range of services that we need to start looking at within the Caribbean and seeing what services we can bring forward. Vashti mentioned a harmonized approach towards legislation. That is the site in the OECS. That is something we may need. That is something we may need to fully get the benefits of like what we are discussing with respect to a single token being used within Caribbean territories. So we need a harmonized approach towards tackling these problems, but I'm not saying anything we haven't been saying for the past, I don't know how long. But applying it to DFS, we need to start looking at it as it applies to this problem.
If you may, Chair, just to move on a little bit, Vashti, if you give me a bit of permission. This matter of, you see, you've talked about, we've been talking about these things for a while. But, you know, I still don't know if we've had any institute, if you've had a university, if you've had anybody come together, form a full-time think tank to work through these issues that aren't going to get worked through.
Funded and outcome.
Guys,
I know, but so, I mean, it makes me wonder, when are we going to have to get a couple of people as champions to the university, to the central banks and so on, to begin to put some resources there and do some of this work, because we've been talking about these things. I worked with William Demas back in 1974.
Oh gosh, man. Oh gosh.
I say no more. So you understand the kind of frustration I will feel. But we haven't put anybody full time and work on these issues. If you work on them full time, we're going to see the problems you have in terms of legislation or regulation or execution. I mean, what Jamaica's done there with Great Kennedy with their system, it's something I don't know. I say, well, why can't the other central banks get Jamaica to come and do it for them? And why can't they go and do something else and then they can go and do it for everybody? I mean, it just seems to have made so much good sense what they have done. They've taken the care and so on. Now, from what Gabriel says, Central Bank of Barbados is working with them on the Bitcoin business. Maybe at some point in time that needs to just be taken there and carried to Jamaica or carried to Trinidad or wherever, and let's figure out what we got to do down here on it. But that's the kind of thing I think that is the kind of approach we need to take going forward, rather than this approach where we each feel we had to start from scratch. If Jamaica had a sandbox and they'd done their thing, you think the sandbox can be any different in Barbados, particularly? No different.
Vashti, that was a curve. There are two curveballs to you. One is a bouncer, one's a curveball. Let's see how you handle it.
Thank you, Chair. You know, I hear your sandbox propose, and I laud Jamaica's effort highly. It's very commendable. However, there was this initiative in another Caribbean island. Was it St. Vincent or was it in Dominica, where a telecommunications provider had tried to give Bitcoin out, a free Bitcoin distribution to all those people who wanted it, in an attempt to generate a market drive for its use and take up. You know, they had to call it off because, well, besides the obvious, well, if it's free, it's not good. There was so much mistrust about, you know, what are we going to do with it, how it works. The truth about it is that what may work for Guyana and Haiti, where you have a huge population of unbanked, may not necessarily maintain in a country like Trinidad, or maybe even Jamaica, where you have a higher percentage of banked, but also more options or wide range when it comes to banking. And I really endorse the minister's opinion with regard to the think tank. The think tank advocates taking a multi-stakeholder approach, which is the same concept as a sandbox approach in terms of let's see how this works, get the players together, and let's try to make this work. But outside of the market players, I think, and from a regulatory approach, one of the reasons that there seems to be a hands-off is a combination of territoriality and vagueness, because certain new systems involving digital currencies where you want to get more people on board involves a combination of your financial regulator, your telecommunications regulator, and your ICT regulator as well, if such regulator exists within your country, and collaboration between the three. Because the company that offers, say, mobile banking is a telecommunications company that is collaborating and piggybacking on a financial institution. So it involves that multi-stakeholder, broad spectrum approach when it comes to bringing the necessary players on board. But the critical and foundation up approach about getting the necessary inputs. Let your market drive you to what it wants is also an equally valid approach. And I know that this may have been touted on or before 1974 and will probably go further to us. I tell you, it is very, very likely. However, it is a step in the right direction to understand its importance because, as I said, globalization is such that it's not going to, technology and innovation is not going to wait on you to come up with a solution, you know. Where there's money as a valuable tenant, business needs to be done. And Forex, due to globalization, needs to be utilized by businesses that are increasingly multinational in its buyer and seller chain. They're going to come up with innovative ways in which to trade and in which to barter using your different commodity value system. So, Chair, I defer to your...
That was very interesting, and particularly that last comment about the power of capital and their willingness and ability to change the platform of conversation of the transaction. But I want to throw an idea out. It's been my pet peeve. Some people have heard me speaking about it. About what about the use of the varying use of closed and open systems? Why can't we have a closed network? That's what I thought what Bit was doing, but apparently it's not. Where all the I think Shiva talked about it, where you buy some sort of token. It's a closed network. It doesn't interact with the traditional financial services sector, and it allows onboarding. It would allow intra-regional, depending on the size of the network, trade transactions. It won't deal with the Forex, the traditional Forex. It wouldn't treat with remittances. But what about building closed networks that can then get the necessary capacity to interact with the open networks? Open network being the formal banking system. What are your thoughts on that, Minister? And this is my last intervention before we go to the floor, because I think I only the last half hour open to the floor so we can get some question and answers.
I'm going to tell you what I will tell people. Ministers should not advise themselves. Nor should lawyers advise themselves either. So when my technical people tell me what they think of that kind of idea, then I can address it. But I'm just being very honest. I'm not a technical guy, and I have to think through that kind of issue. What I must say to you, there's got to be some interaction if you're going to talk about a currency that's accepted by everybody. There's got to be some central issuing authority.
Yes.
And some central redeeming body. And once you've got a central issuing body, central redeeming body, you've got your links to the financial system. So you can't really avoid some links to the financial system as I see it. Otherwise you're back into the days where everybody created his or her own means of exchange and store value. So I don't quite see that happening, but I have to let the people who spend the time thinking about those technical issues, both ICT and financial issues, tell me if what I'm saying is foolishness.
Yeah, with respect to our closed network, if you look at the digital currency side, this is what the central banks in Bank of England, Bank of China, Bank of Canada, they are looking at digital fiat issued by a centralized authority, which is not quite digital currency as it is right now, which is more decentralized, things like Bitcoin and so on. So those things are down the line. A more intermediary thing you could possibly have is, let's say, for instance, a mobile money operator partners with a telecom operator that has a regional presence and there's harmonized regulation that recognizes that e-money in the various territory, then you can have something like that. But will it then necessarily fit all of the various services that you're trying to provide? Maybe not, because that may just be a mobile money service, things like peer-to-peer and so on. And it goes back to a point that Vashti made about the market must drive these solutions, and this is a point that Dr. McNaughton raised as well, in that having gone through that whole process of getting the regulation in place, finding or stimulating the market enough to be responsive to the products is the next step. And the market must drive what it is you're trying to produce. There are various types of services. We need to delineate the services, fund the think tank, have different areas looking at the services within the think tank, and let's go forward.
In this regard, I tend to defer to the Honourable Senator's perspective, and I take it that economics is his default setting. So what happens is that every central bank or common unit of currency must be an authorized currency. So even if you were to have your closed network, it would still need to be an authorized tender, a unit issue for value. And I know they say regulators tend to wear an iron hat because we tend to come down on anything positive and light and innovative, but that's not the truth. We just sit down and think of the worst case scenario. Like if you let them go ahead with their little closed box principle, and trade with their little money, what was the worst thing that could happen? Within that closed network, there are issues that need to be considered in relation to consumer protection, in terms of regulation, in terms of oversight and transparency, in terms of what happens when something goes really wrong, in terms of regulation and reporting. And even within, it's a fun fact, in order to even act as a non-banking financial institution, you must have a base core of at least $15 million to start, because it is presumed that whatever unit of currency you put out there, you have a matching value in your reserves in the event that something happens. So I take on board, the concept that, okay, let's try it within a closed system. But from a regulatory perspective, I also defer to Shiva's idea that what we need to do is very closely assess and evaluate how a concept and the use of certain digital currencies can be successfully integrated into your current economy.
And just something that Shiva mentioned just now, which took me back a couple of years. We used to have something called the CARICOM Multilateral Clearing Facility. Some of you may remember it. We in Barbados used to remember it fondly until some transactions were put through it, which brought the credit limits to screeching and halt, and we ended up having to swallow a large debt because the system owed us and couldn't pay us. But that system was developed to facilitate the intra-regional trade, and they had the set rates of exchange of one currency against the other for intra-regional trade, so as to remove some of the vagaries of the currency from that trade and to encourage it to happen. The notion of a token for intra-regional trade brings that back to mind, and I think we'd have to look at that, what happened then, learn some lessons from that, as to, not to say token idea couldn't possibly work in some form or other, but we might have to look at that history, understand why that facility eventually had to be allowed to collapse. Because you can't put certain size of transactions through it and still expect the credit limits to hold. Just a little thought.
All right, so I'm going to, just to wrap up some of the major talking points, I think we all talked about both the all of the policy, technical, and legal considerations. We've looked at risk for the banking, risk for the banking, which is the external risk. Then there's also internal risk in terms of managing, ensuring the sustainability of the internal system. We talked about the need for possibly a more robust think tank sort of, or fora, let's put it this way, a fora for where these ideas can be further deliberated upon and brought to market so that we have concrete solutions in the near term, within a year, Shiva, or less, right? If possible, so that we could have something to start developing. I am gonna open the floor and give us 27 minutes of rapid fire interaction with you guys. So I'm gonna start with you, my friend in the cream jacket, who's had his hand up early. Then
DSL.
All right. So I'm think I'm pretty young here. So certain things I understand, but I refuse to completely comprehend. So we live in 2017, for God's sake, right? We went through at least 2 financial global meltdown. I said global, so which you could point fingers at US, England, Dubai, wherever, right? And the main question from the senator was the issue with the US. No one for the last 2 days swung that around and said, what is the issue with our correspondent bankers? How can the Caribbean hedge against their mismanagement and greed to protect the Caribbean with such small economies from suffering consequences of your external economies? What is CARICOM and all these other regional bodies doing to protect us against that fallout? As one clear question, no one has attacked. Secondly, given that I just said that, with that backdrop, given that what has happened in Jamaica and they are stepping forward, what happened in Jamaica may not be copy and paste exactly all across the Caribbean. But oh God, it's working. Well, it is working. People are using it. It is not perfect. Of course, as Professor Norton said, there's some revision, there's some laws came out afterwards, whatever. But it is working. And if it is working, then it only makes sense to me, because a lot of legal stuff I really don't know, but clearly in Jamaica they have lawyers too. They have regulators too. I assume they went to similar schools, studied similar books. And they all came... Same books. Oh, great. Same. It makes it easy, even more baffling for me. I'm just literally confused. And it came to a solution that works. In Haiti is working, right? In Guyana it's working, but there's not a lot of push, right? Because there's a whole nother dynamic. So it wouldn't exactly work in Guyana. There's some infrastructure work that needs to be done. My point is, a lot of dancing, excellent samba moves, but somehow we escape like the root problem no one is willing to address. We have large banks who said, okay, I don't want to deal with the Caribbean. Well, if the Caribbean don't want to deal with you, okay, and your currency that's causing a lot of debt in the Caribbean, and therefore increasing the cost of transaction for businesses. So that's another issue, an economic issue that's impacting the use of technology in the Caribbean.
Okay. The floor is yours, sir.
Let me go to the one about what Grace Kennedy is doing in Jamaica. I verily expect that Grace Kennedy, with its tentacles around the Caribbean, will soon roll that out, and all the Caribbean countries and do the appropriate adaptations. I used to serve on a board of a finance company in Barbados that Grace Kennedy used to have interest in. So I know just a little bit about the fact that Grace Kennedy isn't a sloth when it comes to getting his products and services around. They've tested it. I expect very shortly you see Mr. McNaughton come down to Barbados and try to do something there. So I'm not worried about that. I think when the private guys have done their thing, they see it's working and it's profitable, they're going to go there and find the other markets for it. So, but don't the instant gratification thing don't really work too good for it. So, but that's going to come. The second thing is this matter of correspondent banking. We've heard from the international people that we need to do more in terms of knowing the risks that our customers are facing and the risks that they're posing to us. And Vashti alluded to it. I think she said it. She didn't allude. She said it straight right. The issue that's been put to us that you guys have to do a lot more controls in your banking system if we are going to deal with you, because we are not going to incur those costs. Those costs, if we incur those costs, you do not have. All of you put together in the Caribbean don't have sufficient volume for us to bother to deal with you. So, maybe that's bravado, I don't know. But we don't want to test that either. So the central bankers I know are working very hard with the commercial banks and to put in place the kind of regulation that would remove the hesitance to deal with the Caribbean. Now we all know that there's more money laundering occurs outside in major money centers than occurs in the Caribbean. But you know what? Might is right in some things, it seems. But so you've got that situation. But all we can do is try to make sure our commercial banks and our insurance companies, and this thing goes around not only to the commercial banks, the financial community, the real estate people and everybody else, have got to be able to put in place the appropriate processes to make sure that that we can pass muster. And if we go with digital inclusion, the retail agents are going to have to be able to do that as well. Because when they go beyond the large retail agent at Grace Kennedy, or they go beyond a bank, they're going to go and look at where those flows are coming from. So, in a sense, you really can't get away from doing those checks, not only because the international banks, but also for local securities services. Need also to be able to know what's happening with money flows.
As Cleveland just walked in the room, I remembered something that I think he piloted or championed some while ago, the Caribbean Susu Bank, in terms of some sort of micro, multi-stakeholder, cross-funding bank for, well, not traditional bank, but a source, a crowdfunding of finance to support micropayments. Minister, what do you think about something like that?
That's wonderful. Do that. Let me tell you something that's going to happen with the large foreign commercial banks. You do a crowdfunding, and they're going to say, "Now tell me, who's in this crowd, and where did they get that money from?"
Okay,
that's a fact.
Just before I hand over the microphone, Agro mentioned what regional players are doing. So ECLAC is at this very moment doing a de-risking study. They were going on a number of missions to a number of countries. I will not say what countries. I'm probably not allowed to say what countries. In the coming weeks, and there'll be a paper out before the end of the year about the de-risking and the correspondent banking issues and what particular countries in the Caribbean are facing. Thank you. Hands going up everywhere.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Samuel Williams. First of all, this is an excellent panel, and Senator, thank you, Cleveland, also for having me here. Turks and Caicos Islands. I'm quite different. My scenario is quite different from your independent republic states. We are a micro market that is still considered a colony. And as such, the British powers would pass legislation for and on behalf of us. And yet one of the things that we argue about is that while they try to get us to meet these required standards, they themselves don't meet them likewise. So, and as far as de-risking, and the risk is always there and it will continue to be there and make no difference what platform the money is transacted on. Risk is risk, period. I just have a quick question with the multiplicity of the Caribbean Basin nationals and all the different things. We're talking about different money. We use US currency owned by the British. We import everything from the US and the Canadians run the economy. So explain to me what exactly would Anguilla, Turks and Caicos Islands, Bermuda is expected and the likes. These are micro markets, 35,000 people. That's our population, as opposed to Anguilla, 20,000, 10,000. So when you say the central banking and the Caribbean flavor, all this stuff is great, but the political will to get it done, the central bank, open close is the best solution, but we have to decide how we can handle the currency for international exchange. Because we will buy, because of some other trading convention agreements, we will buy. So we need to go through a central system. But it's no different from what the Chinese stock exchange have to trade with the New York Stock Exchange. It's just a matter of working out what that mechanism look like. But for crying out loud, what is US? It's not Caribbean. And we got to get our mentality to understand that. Our situations are different. So having said that, I really would like to hear, it's not a legislation thing, it's not a political thing or a technology thing. It is, do we have the will to do what is the right thing for our community when we get these great percentage of unbanked and now we're moving to a technology where there is no money to put in the socks in a can outside, but you have to use your card to do a transaction.
Vashti?
Colleague in Cayman Islands, or Turks and Caicos, right? I feel your pain because you belong to a block of islands, Turks and Caicos, Cayman, and BVI, that have it's literally a magnetic glass over you that looks at every single financial transaction. You all are literally always on the verge of being blacklisted. I think you have been blacklisted and then taken off and been put on again because they love to advertise you as a great vacation spot and a great place in which you can hide your money. The Panama Papers recently did not help your scenario at all, but it puts things into perspective, doesn't it? From a Caribbean perspective, but even when we look at correspondent banking and remittances, and particularly in the case of the British overseas territories that operate, there's something called a legal fiction that is created when you pass legislation in your own country, that these laws are going to take territorial effect within the bounds of your four corners and your archipelagic waters. But laws, as well as countries, do not exist in isolation. And particularly when it comes to finance and currencies, we belong to a globalized banking system. And even though we hold very aesthetically to the notion of sovereignty and autonomy with regard to trade, every single one of us in this room is naive enough to know, or does not have that naivete to think that we're not bound nationally by international trade agreements, international affiliations with regard to global financial standards, and the IMF and World Bank play a huge role with regard to our national budgets, our national planning, and also the structure of our national financial systems when it comes to transparency and trading. And though I take on board the views of our young colleague expressed that if Jamaica could do it and Guyana could do it and Haiti could do it, why can't we do it? It's just great. It's good in theory, but every central bank within every country also needs to adapt its own system. And why don't we give pushback to international multinational banks like tell HSBC and Lloyds and Chase, well, we're not trading with you because of the fact that we want to do our own thing. You are just a drop in their bucket. That's not really going to bother them any at all.
Right.
So
I'll have one last question. They've put the leash on us, so I need a short question and a adroit response from the panel, if possible, before we wrap
It will
up.
be a short question, but just a quick comment on de-risking, because it actually affects the businesses of which I'm a part. We're money services businesses. And I mean, we've had discussions and consultation with multiple stakeholders, correspondent banks, as high as the Treasury Department. And one of the challenges that they have with MSBs in the region is the large amount of cash. Generally speaking, in our markets, we're 80–85% cash. So I'm saying this to say that there is a correlation between the de-risking problem and our interest in moving into these digital financial services. And I'm saying services, I'm not speaking about currencies because that creates its own challenge. And what I'm talking about, the channels. If we can move a lot of these cash transactions into these electronic channels, the correspondent banks will not look at Jamaica as $2.5 billion of remittances, but it will be able to drill down to the number of these remittances that are going into a regulated instrument. So I'm just saying that to say that there's that correlation that we shouldn't lose sight of. The question, though, is across the region, Grace Kennedy, we are in money services in 11 of the Caribbean islands. And I personally have had reason to consult with regulators in pretty much several of these markets. And the regulators will consult with other regulators in Jamaica, in the Cayman Islands, in Trinidad, etc., as it relates to matters around governance and matters around compliance. So there is consultation taking place across the regulatory bodies. In the areas of innovation and these innovative products, there seems to be no consultation. When you meet with regulators in the various bodies, they have no idea what is happening in Jamaica. Well, they know that a service was launched, but they don't see it fit to reach out to their colleagues in the central bank in Jamaica and say, tell me what happened. Tell me what your challenges were. How can we improve on that and therefore aid in the deployment of similar services in our Jamaica, in our own market? And the question I'm asking is why? Why isn't that consultation taking place across regulatory bodies across our markets?
Okay. Minister, I'm going to have to put a leash on you and see if you can give him an answer.
You can't put a leash on Minister when talking. I got to go teach you fellas. Anyhow, let me just very quickly say, I don't know why that is. It could be this disposition by central bankers not to deal with things until they blossom and they're there. But one of the things I've always tried to live by is that try to identify the things that I don't know. Talk about the things I know, other people who may have a different perspective, but also especially talk with people about the things that I don't know. And I say, is this something that I don't know about this matter? Now, you have to have a fairly weak ego to do that, because they might be told you're a damn idiot, but that's all right. But I don't know. It just seems to me to make the ultimate sense that if something is happening in some other jurisdiction, you hear about it, you pick up the phone and call the guy and says, I hear so-and-so is happening up by you. Tell me a little bit more about it, because you know what will happen? You can soon come down here and bring it down. Somebody soon come here and bring it down here with me. I'm going to be in trouble. So let me... But I don't know, there's a central bankers meeting a couple times a year and so on. But maybe the agenda is a fixed agenda, and somebody's thought to insert in that agenda this matter of innovative services or or digital financial services. I suspect that's it. But once again, their champion might then maybe your governor might be prepared to put it on the agenda of the governor's meetings, so that we can have they can have a look at it when next they meet. I suggest you have a chat with him. I'll certainly have a chat with our acting governor of the central bank about that.
Vashti, do you want to go?
Sure. I do know for a fact that within the Caribbean there is a periodical meeting that is held with regard to the governors of the various central banks, and their agenda is preset. But what you do find, because they're fairly regulated gentlemen and women, but what happens is that a lot of the input into what makes it to the agenda is determined by the advice of its National Payment Systems Council or National Payment Systems Advisory Committee. I can take an example or draw an example. In the case of Trinidad and Tobago, in which I am a member of that committee, one of the things that we would have raised with our own governor is that digital financial currency business, because it is in our space and it is within the regional space. So you find that the discussion does happen with regard to financial matters, but with regard to the innovation matters, where there's a critical link between currency and ICT, technology, and even telecommunications, that is where the convergence of technology and the intrusion into the realm of finance involves much more than just a talk with the governors of the central bank, and I'd humbly submit that. It involves a talk with your telecommunications regulators and your ICT regulators in conjunction with your governors of your central bank, because you find that mobile payments has been in the arena for a long time, but there are new areas that involve the use of ICT and finance.
Okay.
Actually, I believe the problem is that, where you mentioned that a number of, the central bankers are accustomed to dealing with papers, properly prepared papers, and that they use for those discussions. Now, if there's nobody doing that similar kind of work on the innovative financial services, digital financial services, chances are you're not going to get a real substantive paper for discussion.
Thus the conversation.
And there may be some old talk around it, but then, in not a serious, which is why I really feel very strong we need to
think tank.
push on that think tank to get that heavy lifting done in terms of thinking about these things.
International bodies who have been contracted by our central bank, from the World Bank, from IDB, and the like of those institutions that have also helped to guide the policy.
Yes.
So, my only problem is, it's vested in Jamaica, we've launched, that's great. But the rest of the region is not benefiting from that intellect.
No, and
that's my problem.
Okay, and I think that's a good place to wrap up. Because it...
No, you too fast. You too fast this evening. I know where to go. What you should do,
organizers, I try,
is you should apply for a license to do the same thing in Trinidad and in Barbados and in the OECS. Then they don't have a choice but to deal with the matter. But don't give up in Jamaica, bring it down the islands, huh?
Yeah. So, and that work was a bacchanal, as they say in Trinidad. And I think that culminates some of the major ideas, not all of the ideas, into a nice germane point that we need as a regional community to crystallize the major findings, learnings, pitfalls, much like Bobby's paper would have given some ideas. We need some rebuttals. We need to do some serious academic work to help build the foundation of a regional conversation while the innovators do their thing. We need to document, we need to record these experiences so that it can inform the policymakers more quickly, right? Meanwhile, this is not to say that we don't continue benchmarking ourselves against the regulatory frameworks of our international partners. We continue to benchmark ourselves and be mindful of our trade and other obligations. But in that conversation, it would allow for an appropriate holistic review of both the technical issues, right? Well, first identifying the problem. Is it correspondent banking? Is it at the macro level and onboarding at the micro level? Is it de-risking and the whole question of risk that we have to address in both the macro and micro considerations, and how the technologies that are being put in play address these issues. And with that, I'd like to bring a close to this session. It was intriguing and it was a lot of fun.